What if I told you that someone close to you actually doesn't like you? What if I told you that some of the people closest to you might not be exactly on your side? Even smiling, even socializing, even saying they care? This isn't paranoia, it's disguised hostility working silently, almost invisibly, but emotionally perceptible. The most dangerous thing is not the direct attack. It's the opposite. It's the emotional manipulation camouflaged in jokes, the silence that weighs more than words, and that strange atmosphere of social exclusion that you feel, but can't taste. Gradually, you begin to doubt yourself, your reading, your own emotional intuition. And here comes a point that changes everything. According to Carl Jung, there is a mechanism called shadow and psychological projection. That is, many people do not deal with their own hidden envy, so they turn it into silent rivalry, emotional devaluation, and even veiled contempt against the other without ever admitting it. The result? Relationships where communication seems normal, but underneath there's relational gaslighting, blame reversal, distortion of reality, comments with slight aggression, and a constant sense of toxic relationship dynamics that leave you drained without you understanding exactly why. And the question that remains is heavy: are you really surrounded by safe people? Or just learning to survive within an emotional game that no one has had the courage to explain to you yet? Have you ever noticed how, sometimes, the presence of someone close generates a discomfort that is difficult to explain? It is not something evident, but a kind of hostility disguised in the environment, almost like a constant emotional noise. Emotional intuition begins to signal small details that the rational mind tries to ignore. And when this happens within close relationships, everything becomes even more confusing and delicate. This discomfort does not come out of nowhere. It is often linked to subtle dynamics of toxic relationship dynamics, where the energy is not entirely clear. There may be hidden envy, small silent comparisons, or even a silent rivalry that no one admits. On the outside, everything seems normal, but inside there is a tension that builds up little by little. And the curious thing is that you start to feel it before you even understand why. The problem is that this feeling is often invalidated, both by others and by yourself. This makes room for emotional devaluation, as if your perception is always exaggerating something simple. But ignoring this feeling can reinforce passive-aggressive communication patterns and small signs of contempt. And it is exactly at this point that the story starts to get deeper. Because discomfort is rarely just in your head. This is perhaps the most dangerous part of the whole emotional experience, when disguised hostility has already been felt, but the mind begins to retreat. You feel something strange, but soon the question comes: is this just something in my head? This oscillation makes room for relational gaslighting, inversion of guilt, distortion of reality, where your perception loses strength. And without realizing it, you begin to doubt your own emotional intuition, which once seemed so clear. This internal conflict is not random. It arises in environments with toxic relationship dynamics, where signs are too subtle to be proven, but too strong to ignore. The presence of hidden envy and silent rivalry can generate contradictory behaviors in the people around them. One day they treat you well, the next they answer you coldly, and this feeds even more mental confusion. It's like you're always trying to crack an emotional code that changes all the time. And when you try to rationalize everything, emotional devaluation comes into play. Phrases like "you're exaggerating" or "you think too much work" is a reinforcement of this internal doubt. This weakens your perception and makes room for passive-aggressive communication, which leaves you with no concrete basis to react. Deep down, you start to wonder if you're seeing anything real. Or just designing all of this. Often disguised hostility does not appear in grand gestures, but in small attitudes that go almost unnoticed. A cooler tone of voice, a look that changes suddenly, and the feeling of emotional intuition begins to become more active. Within these relationships, there may be a silent rivalry that is never directly assumed, but is always present. Hidden envy appears in indirect and subtle comparisons, creating an awkward mood within relationships that seem secure. The most confusing thing is when this is accompanied by passive-aggressive communication, where nothing is said clearly, but everything is felt in the environment. This type of dynamic reinforces toxic relationship dynamics, and little by little you begin to doubt your own perception. In Jung's psychology, there is the idea that what we do not recognize in ourselves can appear as a psychological projection Jung's shadow in others. This means that certain people can see emotions in you that actually belong to themselves. And in this process, disguised hostility can appear as criticism, coldness, or even indifference. All this without ever being consciously assumed. When this mechanism comes into play, relationships begin to take on a strange weight. Emotional intuition picks up on signals, but the mind tries to rationalize everything to avoid internal conflict. This is where toxic relationship dynamics arise, where no one is clearly a villain, but something does not flow well. And the sense of silent rivalry can grow without any direct discussion. The most interesting thing is that the shadow does not appear as something obvious, but rather as small distortions in the way we are treated. This can involve emotional devaluation, critical looks, or even a slight contempt hidden in neutral attitudes. And when all of this gets mixed up, you start to question if you're seeing too much, or seeing exactly what is there. And this doubt, in itself, completely changes the way you perceive the other. Emotional intuition almost always appears first as an internal whisper, not as a certainty. You feel something strange, but you can't prove it, and that creates a quiet tension. In environments marked by disguised hostility, this signal is usually quickly muffled. And little by little, you begin to doubt your own instinct. The problem is that in many toxic relationship dynamics, intuition is constantly delegitimized. Subtle phrases or attitudes that reinforce emotional devaluation make you retreat. This makes room for relational gaslighting and version of blame, distortion of reality to settle almost invisibly. And what was an internal alert becomes a mental confusion that is difficult to organize. When you repeatedly ignore this signal, perception begins to lose sharpness. Hidden envy and silent rivalry become more difficult to identify clearly. And the cycle repeats itself. You feel, you ignore, you question, and you feel it again. Until realizing your own intuition becomes the first step to understanding what is really happening. Silence, in many cases, is not neutral. It can be a sophisticated form of hostility in disguise. You talk, you try to connect, but you only receive an absence of emotional response. This lack of feedback immediately activates the emotional intuition, which perceives something out of place. And this emptiness can be more aggressive than direct words. In many toxic relationship dynamics, silence is used as a tool of control. He can carry contempt even without a single offensive word. This creates a sense of social exclusion within relationships that should be close. And little by little, you start to question whether you did something wrong. The most subtle thing is that this silence often mixes with relational gaslighting, blame reversal, reality distortion. You feel the rejection, but you can't pinpoint exactly why. This makes room for emotional devaluation, where your perceptions are put in doubt. And silence, which seemed harmless, begins to become a much deeper psychological mechanism. Sarcasm often arrives disguised as a joke, but it carries a clear layer of hostility in disguise. You laugh out of politeness, but something inside senses the weight, and emotional intuition ignites a warning that's hard to ignore. In relationships marked by toxic relationship dynamics, sarcasm becomes an elegant form of indirect attack. He mixes passive-aggressive communication with small provocations, creating a constant climate of tension and silent rivalry. Over time, these comments erode emotional security. Emotional devaluation appears disguised as light play, while a slight contempt hides between the lines. And you start to wonder if you're exaggerating or just noticing too much. Silent rivalry does not always appear as a direct dispute, it hides in subtle comparisons and indirect looks. You feel like you have to explain yourself all the time, as if you're always in an invisible competition. In many toxic relationship dynamics, this competition is not assumed, but is felt in the air. The presence of hidden envy transforms simple achievements into emotional triggers, and everything seems to generate a kind of constant tension. The most delicate thing is when this is accompanied by emotional devaluation, as if your advances were never fully recognized. Emotional intuition notices the pattern before the mind understands, and little by little you begin to question your own space within the relationship. Emotional devaluation appears in a subtle, almost polite way, as if your feelings are always a little exaggerated. This generates an internal wear and tear that is difficult to explain, and the emotional intuition begins to become more and more confused. In relationships marked by toxic relationship dynamics, a lack of empathy doesn't have to be aggressive to hurt. It arises in silence, changing the subject, or minimizing what you feel, creating a constant climate of disguised hostility. Over time, this can make room for passive-aggressive communication patterns, where you feel like you need to justify even the basics of what you experience. Silent rivalry can also mix into this scenario, making even your emotions seem like a threat to each other. Emotional manipulation does not always come with declared intention, it often disguises itself as care or even help. Someone can guide you, but with a tone that reduces your choices, while emotional intuition notices something out of place. In certain toxic relationship dynamics, false help is accompanied by constant comparison. Look how so-and-so does better, or I'm just helping you. And this feeds a sense of silent emotional devaluation. Over time, this subtle control mixes with quiet rivalry and hidden envy, creating an environment where your decisions always seem to be questioned. Disguised hostility appears precisely in this deceptive softness, and you begin to doubt whether you are being helped or molded. Social exclusion does not always happen explicitly, sometimes it appears in small gestures that leave you out without explanation. Invitations that stop coming, conversations that change the subject, and emotional intuition begins to notice the pattern before any confirmation. In some toxic relationship dynamics, this exclusion is accompanied by a subtle distortion of your image. You come to be interpreted differently than you really are, as if there is a slight psychological projection Jung shadow on you. The most confusing thing is when this mixes with relational gaslighting, blame reversal, reality distortion, making you look like the problem within the situation. Emotional devaluation intensifies, and disguised hostility gains strength, while silent rivalry acts behind social interactions. When you start noticing patterns of toxic relationship dynamics, the first step is not to react, it's to protect yourself. Emotional intuition is no longer ignored and becomes a more reliable internal guide. This does not mean paranoia, but rather awareness of when there is disguised hostility in the environment. And from there, you start to reorganize how you position yourself in relationships. Setting limits is not about pushing everyone away, but about interrupting cycles of emotional devaluation. It is learning not to get into passive-aggressive communication games or respond to relational gaslighting, blame reversal, reality distortion. In this process, you also reduce the impact of possible silent rivalries and hidden jealousies. And little by little, clarity begins to replace emotional confusion. Emotional protection is born when you understand that not every relationship needs to be explained or fixed. Some simply require conscious distance to preserve their inner peace. And this is not coldness, it is maturity in the face of repetitive patterns of emotional manipulation and subtle contempt. In the end, true strength lies in recognizing what drains you and choosing not to feed these toxic relationship dynamics anymore. After recognizing all these signs, the inevitable question is, how many times have you ignored your own emotional intuitions so as not to confront possible disguised hostility? And how many times has this put you inside toxic relationship dynamics, marked by emotional devaluation and internal confusion? The central point is not to distrust everything, but to learn to see clearly when there is silent rivalry, hidden envy, or even subtle forms of emotional manipulation and relational gaslighting, inversion of guilt, distortion of reality. This awareness changes how you interpret the people and relationships around you. In the end, the most important thing is to protect your peace, recognize patterns, and not diminish yourself to fit into environments that drain your energy. If this content made sense, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more reflections like this.